Next, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Reiger, the Portland Public Schools Director of Clinical and Behavioral Supports.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm really here to just introduce our key speakers and then be available for questions with you in the later part of the program. We're doing a lot to support the students' behavioral and mental health, as well as those that the behavioral and mental health of our educators as well. I want to introduce Chris Salamone, who is a social worker at Talbot Elementary. He's going to speak first about is the pandemic a traumatic event, and what are some of the implications of what we're experiencing collectively. And then he will hand it over to Suzanne Fox, who is the director of the Yellow Tulip Project, which is just one of our partners around mental and behavioral health and understanding the implications of what we're experiencing right now and how to smash the stigma, as she will share later in the program. And then I also want to introduce Sophie Payson, who is a social worker at Portland High School, who will be available to field questions in that part of the program. And I just feel privileged to work with all of these individuals. And I thank you for your attendance and interest. And please follow up with questions in that piece of the program and by email afterwards. So thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris Salamone.
Hello, everyone. And I hope everybody is beginning to feel a little cozy and get ready for the big storm, as they say, coming up the coast, which will probably turn out to be flurries, but always the excitement ahead of time gets us all riled up and excited. But I do want to talk tonight about social emotional health and how trauma impacts the brain, and to sort of tie it in a little bit with the pandemic. Believe it or not, there's a fair amount of disagreement amongst the experts about whether the pandemic is actually a traumatic event. Most of us think probably obviously it is, partly because we can see the impact it has had on our mental health collectively. Emergency room visits for mental health crises have doubled and tripled for everyone from the ages from 5 to 95. It's startling to see the amount of mental health stress and strife that we're seeing with kids as young as 3, 4, 5, and 6, that as a result of changes in their daily lives because of the pandemic. The recent survey of children from ages 5 to 17, 45% of children describe themselves as feeling sad or hopeless much of the time. That's pretty dramatic. These numbers also increase for students who are vulnerable and marginalized to begin with. So students with disabilities, minorities, and students identified with the LGBTQ community also say that they feel sad and hopeless more since the pandemic began than they did prior to it. And it's not just students. I think if you've been reading the paper at all lately and seeing the effects that it's had on teachers, but according to a recent survey, 53% of teachers have said they've considered leaving the profession. And again, I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but as this pandemic has gone on, it has caused a lot of us a tremendous amount of angst, and certainly something for us to consider and be thinking about how do we address this going forward. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Next one beyond that. Next one beyond that. Next one beyond that. Next one beyond that. Okay. So to sort of begin to sort of talk about the question, is the pandemic a trauma? Let's just look at the definition of trauma put out by the U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration. It sees individual trauma results from an event or a series of events or a set of circumstances that are experienced by an individual as physically, emotionally harmful, or life-threatening, and has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning, mental health, physical and social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Often we think of trauma as resulting from a single sort of catastrophic event or a series of events that happen over a series of time that just overwhelm a person's system to function and leave them for long periods of time afterward without, if they don't receive treatment, as having some really difficulty adjusting afterward. Next slide, please. So as I said, I think we all agree COVID-19 has done a number on us physically. But let's just talk a little bit more again about what trauma does to our brain and how it works. So in this slide, if I'm not sure you can see my pointer, but I'm pointing right now at the brainstem. When a person has had a traumatic experience, that part of the brain which controls your breathing, your blood pressure, heart rate, digestive function, that gets put into overdrive. And for students and researcher Bruce Perry looked at a number of students who had been involved in, that experienced a devastating catastrophic event. And they looked at their resting heart rate and they followed it over a series of years. And even years after the event happened, these children had a resting heart rate of 20 to 40 beats higher than most children who had not had experienced that. So sometimes when they've had a catastrophic event, it overwhelms the system and it takes a long time for the system to calm down if there isn't some intervention. The other part of the brain that I want to talk a little bit about just tonight is the amygdala. And the amygdala is the brain's bodyguard. It's the part of the brain that goes around scanning the environment, looking to see if there's danger. For a person who has not experienced a traumatic event, it probably comes online once or twice a day. That if you're driving to work, you're really not aware of it, someone steps out in front of the car, danger, 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 that part of your brain comes online. But for someone who has experienced a traumatic event or a series of traumatic events, that part of the brain is hypervigilant and overactive all day long. They've looked at that part of the brain for children who have experienced abuse and neglect, and sometimes hundreds of times a day, that part of the brain comes on high alert, believing that there's danger, and the body begins to react as if there's danger. The other part I want to just talk a little bit about is the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that really is used for more complex reasoning and thinking. When someone's system is overwhelmed, that part of the brain starts to become rewired and be protecting that person from danger. And the parts of the brain needed for complex reason go offline. Many students who have experienced significant trauma have a difficult time concentrating on schoolwork, doing the complex reasoning that's needed to do things like math, reading. And so unless we can intervene and help them calm parts of their brain down so that brain can come back online, it's difficult for them to learn. So let's go to the next slide, please. So when we look at the pandemic, some of the things that can cause trauma are, when you talk about catastrophic events, we're talking about abuse and neglect, witnessing violence, being being in an accident, a natural disaster, being a refugee of war. So a lot of those things can be causing a traumatic response. But during the pandemic, and where a lot of the experts disagree, they're saying that the pandemic has not necessarily been a catastrophic event. In fact, Bessel van der Kolk, who's one of the most leading researchers, doesn't believe it is. He said it's been much more insidious and it's come on slower. So for a lot of us, I remember the first day when Javier told us we were going to go remote, I thought of it as just a snow day. I wasn't really worried about the long-term effects. But as the weeks went on and the days went on and the months went on, with lack of structure and predictable routines, having trouble making long and short-term plans. Could I go out on the weekend to visit friends? Could I plan to go on a vacation? Many of our students had missed significant life events, like having their graduation or proms, or being able to be part of sports teams. So all of these things start to add up over a period of time. And then the lack of social connection and isolation that came from the pandemic also starts to wear on our systems. Is it one catastrophic event that's causing us like some of the ones I listed earlier? Maybe not, but the effects on the physical being of ourselves and our children has been devastating. Next slide. I also just wanted to mention this particular variable because it's something I was reading about the other day. And when I was reading about it, it just made me keep nodding my head in agreement. And I thought maybe it would be something that you might find interesting as well. And it's the idea of the stress and fatigue that we are all experiencing to make decisions. As humans, we prefer our decisions to be very clear cut. We don't like it when things are complicated and we have to put so much energy into figuring out what to do next. When there are two more conflicting views, these decisions become stressful. And currently, we are bombarded with complicated decisions. Do we get vaccinated or not vaccinated? Do we wear a mask or not a mask? Can we visit friends safely or not visit friends safely? Should kids be in school or should they not be in school? Every decision that we make to go to the grocery store, whether to visit, have family members over, have this dual, conflicting, stressful difficulty in making decisions. And so many of us are at the point where we just sometimes want to put the covers up over our head and say enough already. But then we have to go on and we have to keep figuring out how to make this work because life goes on. And we want to try to make the best of the situation that we're currently in. But one thing I also want to caution us about is that when we're forced to make difficult decisions, if I went into the grocery store, for example, today and said, which type of shampoo would I want? I can look at the shelf and I can say, okay, here's one here that makes me have full volume in my hair. That would be terrific. I really would like to have more volume in my hair. And then there's another one that says, boy, it's going to make me super shiny. And I can't decide which one I want. Finally, when I decide I would like to have the one that makes my hair super shiny, I have to convince myself I'm right. So I surround myself with people that say, that's the best shampoo that I've ever seen. And I want to be convinced it's the right thing to do. And then I start to think the people who chose the other one are wrong. And I think we've sort of become very polarized because we've been forced to make such difficult decisions. But when again, researchers have looked at the way we make decisions. And if you can hold both arguments in our head, it allows us to be both more empathetic to each other, more considerate of each other who's making different decisions, and also more open to change if we get new information that comes in that can help us to make a decision that might be better for us. So be aware that these decisions, we're all under stress trying to decide what to do. Be compassionate of each other and that may make a decision that's different than yours, but also be compassionate with yourself. These are not easy decisions to make. Next slide, please. So how are children responding? Not all children and teens respond to stress the same way. Some common changes to watch for are excessive crying or irritation in younger children, returning to behaviors that they have outgrown, for example, toileting accidents or bedwetting, excessive worry or sadness, unhealthy eating or sleeping habits, irritability and acting out behaviors in teens, poor school performance or avoiding school, difficulties with attention and concentration, avoidance of activities enjoyed in the past, unexplained headaches or body pains, increased use of alcohol, tobacco, or other drugs. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about some ways to begin to think about managing it with our children. First of all, let's not sugarcoat it. This stress is real. I was thinking about this metaphor the other day, and it sort of rang true a little bit for me sometimes, is that I feel like sometimes I'm standing in front of my house after a hurricane just blew it over. And I hate to use such a dramatic image, but I'm standing there and it feels terrible. I'm feeling awful. And people keep coming up to me and say, look at the bright side. Let's try to find the best way to, let's look at how to manage this better. The truth is, this isn't fun. The pandemic is real. The stress that's associated with real and it is something that we have to acknowledge with each other and our children before we can go to the next part, which is, okay, this is real, but how are we going to manage and function within this in the most productive, healthy, happy way? So plan and schedule healthy daily routines and include plan A, B, and C. So when we go to school, we know there's a structure to the day. There's a schedule. It starts at, for many, for 7:30 or at 8:30. They have math and English that goes from 8 to 9. It goes throughout the day, and kids go through, and the routines are scheduled, and it's easy. When we have remote days, it's not so easy. And over a period of time, without lack of structure, we start to feel bad. We start to feel more isolated, and depression happens. So when we're doing Plan B on those remote days, make sure that you and your children have a structure and a routine that's planned for those days as well. Get up at the same time, exercise, have a good breakfast, start reading in your activities from 8 to 9. Keep a structure to it and a flow to it so that at the end of the day, there's a feeling of satisfaction, reward for accomplishment during the day. And then there's always Plan C. You can put these plans in place, but we know from being in school, I was in school today, we had my schedule planned. I knew exactly what I was going to do when I walked in the door, and it completely changed the minute I walked in. We have to be able to be flexible and move from thing to thing with some feeling good about when we're able to flex and do it in an efficient way. So again, plan a mental strategy to adjust disruptions in your routine. People often talk about having a mantra that says when the disruption happens, you acknowledge it, and you say, this is going to be okay, Chris. Let's just move on. You'll feel good later when you've handled this well. So just having little things to remind ourselves to get through these difficult times in a positive way. And again, I'm not being Pollyannish about this. I understand this is difficult, and it takes intentional mental energy to follow through on these routines. But these are things that the experts are recommending that we do them. It will help us to feel better and more functioning better within this difficult times we're in. Of course, plan opportunities to connect with friends and family. If you're uncomfortable doing it in person, then do it with Zoom. Try meeting with masks outside if you're more comfortable doing that. But don't stop your opportunities to connect with family and friends. We need to keep that. That's incredibly important. Limit your exposure to the media. This is true for me before the pandemic, but even more so now. One of my biggest concerns about the pandemic for kids is when I hear them come back to school after they've been out on remote, the amount of time they've spent playing video games is astronomical. And that goes back to my first part about planning your schedule, healthy daily routines. It should really be limiting the amount of time that they're on social media and they're on playing video games. Particularly some of the content of these video games are not going to be helping their mental health now or in the future. Be tolerant of others who have opinions different than yours. And this is difficult because sometimes we also feel when we've made a decision that we feel good about, we feel under attack from others who don't agree with us. But the more we can be tolerant of each other, I think the better we're going to be able to get through this together. Also rely on your moral compass and spirituality to help you with the uncertainty. Who knows where this is going to go and how we're going to get through, how this is going to end up. But if we have a moral compass that says we want to get through this together, we're our brother's keeper, let's try to support each other to get through it. Use your spirituality and religion to help with some of that. It's some of the things that are going to help us feel better about the decisions we make as we get through this. Keep physically active, yoga, mindfulness, walking, running, etc. That was true before the pandemic. But when we get in these stages where we feel under stress, we often put those things aside. We want to comfort eat. We want to forget our physical activities. And people sort of laugh about the amount of people who put on the pandemic 15. It's at the point now where we've really got to start taking a look at that. It's not going to help us in the long run if we don't take care of it. And again, eat healthy, get some help if you need it, but do something for others, care for each other and yourself. And that would be my, so that's next slide, I guess, would be handing it over to Susan, who I think will pick up and embellish some of the things I've already talked about. Thank you.
Suzanne, before you start, I just want to tell the audience that they can type in their questions in the Q&A, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Suzanne, do you want me to stop sharing so that you can pull it up on yours?
Sure. So I can go. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Nanette.
Okay.
And I just want to remind everybody that they can put in their questions in the Q&A. If you are like me, that's running out of room in my memory, I would love to just remember that, oh, that's my question, type it in now, and rather than wait until the end. So you're welcome to do that. Thank you.
Actually, Nanette, can you pull it back up? I thought I would just be the co-host so I could advance the slides. Is that possible to do? Sorry.
I don't think so, Suzanne.
No, Suzanne, you'd have to pull it up. I can bring it back up.
Bring it back up, and then I'll just say next slide if that.
Okay. Yeah, no worries.
I don't want to waste time searching. Okay, so you can just go on to the next slide, actually. And well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for including me in this really important evening tonight. I've been talking to Nanette for the past maybe 3 years about coming in to Parent University, and I'm really honored to be here tonight. And I know that everybody is busy, and to show up at 7:30 on a Thursday night, everyone's had long days. I really appreciate people coming out tonight and just share this space together. I'm really also just happy to be here with Chris and Sophie Payson and all of the educators here tonight and the parents here tonight. It's hard to believe that we are entering our third year of this pandemic, and it's been hard. It's been hard for everybody. We all know that. I want to just back up to say that I am not a mental health professional, but I have spent the past 6 years learning everything that there is to learn, and I have so much more to learn. But I'm also a parent in Portland. My daughter, Julia, who you'll see in the slide, is a 2018 graduate of Casco Bay High School. She now is a senior in college out in California. And I want to share a TED Talk that she gave 6 years ago that is a little bit hard to listen to because it shares her story about self-harm and the loss of her 2 best friends to suicide. But it also shares her story of resilience and strength and how the Yellow Tulip Project came to be. And so the next slide will just, show the TED Talk that she gave here in Portland. But before we do that, I'm particularly proud to be here tonight at Parent University because Julia is my baby. I've got 2 older. Oh, looks like we're not able to show it. Okay. Well, then I'll just talk a little bit about her story. So my daughter, Julia, when she was 15, right before her sophomore year of high school began, we were at Popham Beach, and I think I'm a really great mom. I think I'm really close to my kids. I understand what my children are going through. She has 2 older brothers. And we went on a walk at the beach, and she said, "Mom, I need to talk to you. I'm depressed. I've been purposely cutting myself, and I want to get healthy. And I want you to know that. And I'm tired of being alone and struggling with my depression." And that, as a parent, was the most, it was so scary, and it turned my world upside down because how could I possibly miss that my own child was purposely hurting herself and was depressed, and I didn't know. And then on Halloween of that same year, her best friend took her life. And 4 months later, her second best friend took her life. So here we are, my daughter, who alone was struggling with her own depression, had lost her two best friends to suicide in a 4-month period. And suddenly, this young woman who was 15 years old found this one determined voice. She found this voice. I am tired of being alone. I am tired of the stigma. I am tired of shame. I am tired of losing my friends to suicide. And we needed to do something. And what we did just 6 years ago was created something simple and beautiful that was taking the topic of mental illness. Now, mental illness can be a hard topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about. You can talk about your physical pain. I have a cold, I broke my leg, but talking about depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder or mental health issues is a scary and hard thing for a lot of people to do because there's stigma that surrounds this topic. So my daughter and I had a simple idea that we started in Portland. Yellow was her friend Peyton's favorite color, and the tulip was her friend Beata's favorite flower. And the yellow tulip is the flower of hope. So what we started was a simple movement of taking mental illness out of the shadows where you feel alone and smash the stigma. So let's see if we can go on to the next slide, Nanette, and let's see if the second slide works. What happens if you click on the word momentum? Yeah, see if this little video works. So this, before you hit play, this captures the essence of who we are and what we do. So now you can play it. Hopefully the video, the sound will work. Well, I don't think the volume.
The Yellow Tulip Project is a youth organization focused on normalizing conversations around mental health.
The stigma around mental illness deprives people of what they actually need help with if they do have mental illness. And the problem with that is that prolonged their treatment often causes more harm in the long term.
Our mission is to cultivate conversation and community activity in order to smash the stigma surrounding mental illness and to make people feel that they are okay and that hope is out there. The Yellow Tulip Project all began with the passion from Julia Hansen, our founder. After losing two of her best friends to suicide, after dealing with mental health herself and struggling with depression, she knew she had to do something. So she founded the Yellow Tulip Project in this act of resilience and almost defiance. In a world where we don't talk about mental health, she decided to talk about it.
She's the epitome of what YTP represents. It's caring about others, activism, not being afraid to stand up for what you believe, and demonstrating that it's okay to smash the stigma, it's okay to reach out to friends and family if you need help.
We are mainly a youth-based organization. However, we are welcoming anyone and everyone who is willing to focus on smashing the stigma surrounding mental illness. The main thing that the Yellow Tulip Project does is, it's in the name, plant tulips.
Our two signature events are our fall bulb planting ceremony and our spring Hope Day celebration.
These bulb plantings also take place across the country. Members of our movement have also planted yellow tulips at their schools and colleges, and other major events that we do at the Yellow Tulip Project is facilitating dialogues and conversations. Just bringing those spaces to men and women and all in between who need that space to talk about their story and share their story. So our biggest things are A, planting tulip gardens and spreading hope and watching it grow, and B, setting up those opportunities for everyone to share their story on mental health. one of the most important things of YQP is our photo exhibit. We created the I Am photo exhibit to just show that everyday people are struggling, everyday people have mental illnesses, everyday people are affected by the stigma surrounding mental illness.
You have a person who you think looks fine when you look at them, look happy, whatnot, and their line statement could be like, I'm suffering with a mental illness, let's say depression. And the point of that is just by looking at somebody, you can't tell what they're going through.
So it was this beautiful amalgamation of how people are built simply, that every single person has so much going on in their head that unbeknownst to the eye. You can't tell what my favorite band is, you can't tell what my favorite food is, and you can't tell whether or not I struggle with mental illness or not.
I do what I do just because personally I've gone through my fair share of mental illness in my own journey. For me, I wish I had YTP in my corner when I needed the most. So being able to make sure that other people have YTP and its offerings and the resources and the support when they need it, I think if I can help one person, I think that's like more than like I can ever do. So I'm just happy to make sure that I can help other people.
Hi, I'm Andrea Max. I'm from Portland, Maine. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Silky. I do reside in Lafayette, Louisiana.
Hi, my name is Madeline, and I'm from Massachusetts.
Hi, I'm Jaden from Missouri.
Hi, my name is Kelsey Cassetti. I'm from Wisconsin, and we are going to smash the stigma.
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 Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you. So that that gives the essence of who we are and what we do. The young people in the video are all graduates of Deering High School, Portland High School, Shepherd's High School. For me, it is pretty amazing to see the ripple effect of one young person sharing her story and watching this wave of communities and young people and older people coming together in something so simple and something so needed. Because who doesn't know somebody that's struggling with some mental health issue? It's 1 in 5 people worldwide. The Surgeon General has just come out with a report mentioning that youth mental health is a global crisis. We are in a time where we need to talk about mental health all the time. We need to talk about our physical health, our mental health, and it needs to be normalized. So it's, for me, so humbling and so inspiring to start with something so simple and small and watch it grow. And just like a tulip garden, the tulips need to be planted close together. The tulips need to go through the cold, dark winter, and then they push their way up and they bloom in May, which happens to be Mental Health Awareness Month. So it's a beautiful metaphor, a reminder that nobody should be alone in struggling with their mental health, and that just like tulips that need to be planted close together so they can grow, we as a community need to be there to support each other as we struggle with our mental health. So if you can, Annette, just go along. I just want to I'm very aware of our time together. So I'll just kind of go quickly through some of these photographs. But basically what we've done, and which I'm so proud of, is that when we started, it was high school students in Portland, Maine, because that's where my daughter was. She was in high school, and we were working with all of these high schools in Portland, Maine. And very quickly, we realized that mental health is not a high school student issue. And so we've worked with communities that have brought the police department, the library, the social services agencies. It's bringing everybody together. Get your hands dirty as a community and plant a garden. And at that time, there's often poetry, music, a speech, something that reminds people that I'm not alone. And when you feel less alone, it's okay to not be okay. You feel more inclined to reach out for help. So we're trying to make this a community thing. And then, Ned, if you just go on to the next slide, there's some photos of different communities that have been coming together to plant gardens. I love, you can keep going a little bit. I love the fact that, and you can go again. I love the fact that younger students, elementary schools all across Maine, all across New England, are getting their hands dirty and planting hope gardens. And maybe they're too young to have conversations about suicide loss and self-harm, but it's not too early, and Chris can definitely agree with this, it's not too early to talk about self-care and about sometimes how we take care of ourselves. It's okay to sometimes not feel well. So getting these messages out early is so important. So these are just some of the slides of some of the schools and some of the students that have planted gardens. We've started something called Storytelling Alchemy, which I'm really proud about. And the only way to normalize a conversation around mental illness is to have a conversation. And so we have trained all of these young people, and you can go on to the next slide, to share their stories. And here's Danielle. You saw her in the video. She was a graduate of Chevers High School. And the next slide is Stephanie. Hearing people's stories, when you share your raw, hard truth, but then you feel empowered and it helps other people realize that they're not alone. I want to jump to the photo exhibit, and I want to invite Sophie Payson, who is here in the program. This off to the left, you see my daughter Julia, then there's Michael, and then there's Hui in this poster here. But I remember talking to my mom, and she said, well, Julia doesn't look depressed. Well, what does depression look like? You can't see, you don't know what people are going through just by looking at them. So we created this beautiful exhibit. Nanette, just scroll through a few of the slides quickly. These are these photographs of the students. You can go another one or two, and then feel free to keep blasting along. You can go again. I think I had a few more from the photo exhibit. Well, I think I'll pause here for a minute. And Sophie, I'd love to pull you in just to give a little bit of your feedback, because the photo exhibit was just on the walls at Portland High School. And if you can share just in a few words, and we could talk about it more during question time, like what was it like for the students at Portland High to see all these photos, and did it challenge their perceptions of what mental illness looks like? If you want to just jump in and share something.
Sure. I mean, I think, sort of tying it all together, we had a small Yellow Tulip project prior to the pandemic. But when we first came back, it was interesting because several students came up and said, we really want to talk about mental health. They seem much more comfortable oftentimes than adults about talking about their own mental health. I think because the way they've grown up with the social media. But the big thing about the Yellow Tulip project is the connections. And so what started out as like 5 or 6 kids saying, we want to start this. When we went to plant the Yellow Tulip Garden, there were 30 to 40 kids, and they were super like connected. And just like Suzanne was saying, you watched them out there and they were singing songs and they were like planting together. And so to Chris's point of the strategies of like feeling connected with other people and being able to help, beautify outside of Portland High School and do something good for others. It was so helpful to their mental health. People who at times feel really depressed, they can think about that and feel, very happy about doing something and having some control over it. We had the photo exhibit up for a month. We put it up, and we put it up like right down the main hall of Portland High School on the 2nd floor. And within a few days, I was walking by and kids were taking pictures of it, and they were saying like, it just gave them permission to say, wow, like, these people look so fine, and yet they're struggling. And so it made them feel less isolated, like they can talk about it, they can put it in words. So, both the other social worker and I at the high school had lots of people coming and asking us questions about it and wanting to talk about it and feeling the permission to smash the stigma, as the Yellow Tulip Project promotes, to talk about their own mental health. And staff as well. I mean, staff equally are struggling on some level right now, and they loved the exhibit. So from everyone, you know, people who visited, staff and students, that it was really a very large visual of what we're all going through right now.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to stop because I'm aware of our time, and I know there's going to be questions for both Chris and anybody else. But I just wanted to give a sort of sampler of what we do. And our website, I can put it in the chat, but our website is intended for action. And we're a piece of a puzzle. We believe that we can't do this work unless everyone is like together. It takes a village. So our little piece of the puzzle are planting gardens and speaking and doing this piece. But we really are proud to work with Portland schools, the city of Portland, and anybody who's inspired or excited, for your student or your community member or you're an educator. So yeah, so just thank you. That's a lot of information in a short period of time, but just thank you for giving me the space to share a little bit about what we're doing. And our tagline is Smash the Stigma and Hope Happens. And just like those tulips that are pushing through the cold snow, we all need a little hope right now. And it's there. Sometimes it's hard to find, but hope is out there. So thank you so much for including me tonight.
So the floor is open. You can either raise your hand and we'll promote you, or you can type in your question in the Q&A. At the bottom of the screen, you see that there is a feature that is raise hand. So you can click on that if you want to ask your question. Or you can also ask your question in the Q&A. Do you have a question, Juliana? No.
I think there's a question from Lane about K-3 SEL support. I'll just reference that, but Chris can, follow up. But our district assertion is that at pre-K to grade 5, that every classroom is using Second Step, which is an evidence-based curriculum on social emotional learning, which is, when people talk about social emotional learning, it's kind of a curious enterprise. And but really what it comes down to is the active engagement around learning of the skills and knowledge that relate to understanding one's emotions, understanding how to process and identify emotions, how to navigate issues with one another, get along with others, problem solve, make good decisions. And so that's the assertion. And it's been difficult to implement pre-K to 5 in COVID with all of the disruptions and prioritization of what we're trying to pull off in each classroom, given the nature of the need. But that's the assertion. And it's a difficult endeavor in that Second Step, while evidence-based and great and wonderful, can't live in a contained lesson once a week. It has to be interwoven into everything that's happening in the classroom and in the school. And we're still working to fuller implementation. So that's the assertion, and that's what we're working towards, but it's difficult to do. And I've seen it done beautifully in many of our classrooms, but I hope that answers the question.
I could say a little bit about what we're doing at Talbot too. We were doing this prior to the pandemic, but one of the things that all teachers have recognized is that kids are coming to school incredibly dysregulated. And if you go back to when I was talking a little bit about the brain and talking about the brain stem and saying that kids who have experienced trauma, they come in with a resting heart rate that's elevated compared to kids who have not had a traumatic experience. And one of the things we do know is that 2/3 of all children, by the time they turn 16, have had one adverse experience that could be considered traumatic. So that, a good deal of our population comes into school every day with an elevated heart rate, with their blood pressure a little high, with having a difficulty sitting still, with managing sort of feelings that might be happening in their body. So we start every day that someone meets every kid at the bus or at the drop-off. There's a staff that meets them. There's an attempt to meet them with a greeting and a hello, and that to put them at ease as they arrive in the building. The teachers often have a ritual at meeting each of their kids when they arrive to the classroom. Some won't let a student come into the classroom until they've had a chance to make eye contact, say hello, and check in with them before they even walk in. Then they have a morning meeting, and the morning meeting has a structure to it where there's a morning circle and there's a check-in with each kid to see how you're doing, how you're feeling, tell me something great that happened today, something you're worried about. And then there's mindfulness that's built into that, so that trying to help kids regulate, get aware of the physical sensation in their body, and to quell some of that difficulty they're having concentrating down. We start with those kind of activities. And then they're revisited throughout the day, that when kids come in from recess, if they're really fired up and they've been running around and there's been problems, sit down and have another meeting, another group, sort of redo it again. So there's been, we have noticed, and we talked about as a staff, the increase in the angst amongst our kids since the pandemic. So we really have front-loaded all of our SEL activities to get them to help kids to regulate and to manage that more effectively.
There was a question about PHS and whether they have a group to discuss mental health, and we have several different avenues for that. I mean, the Yellow Tulip Project meets once a week, and that's definitely a place where we talk about mental health in those meetings. Also in our health classes, there's a few different sessions around mental health and suicide and substance abuse where they sort of all have an opportunity to talk about mental health. So there's definitely places that are available. And then if people aren't comfortable in groups, they can meet with one of the social workers or school counselors and also talk more individually if they want.
I always just say, let's get curious about what's going on with students and children, and if we can't get them to think about what we're talking about, which might be math or social studies or history, let's talk about what they're thinking about. And these are the issues on the minds of all of our students at this point. Previously was, a hefty proportion of kids, but now is a lot of kids. So I think that this should be the staple that we're talking about and thinking about mental and behavioral health needs of students at every level. And that should be a part of the conversation in every classroom is my feeling. I'm not sure where our questions are at.
So Christina has a question about, is there any resource to help parent who does not believe in mental health issue and have a language barrier?
I mean, sometimes, I don't know what age level they're talking about, but I mean, sometimes the label doesn't have to be there. Sometimes it's seen as, Chris was describing with trauma in particular, that it might be seen in some behaviors or some acting out or some agitation. And so without sort of a label of mental health, I think the important thing is more the interaction and the intervention. So I think sometimes parents feel this need, if their child or teenager in particular comes home and are acting out in some way, that there needs to be a punishment or a reaction as far as writing the behavior. And I think in particular with people coming from trauma backgrounds, whether there's mental health or not, or suicide, the things we're all talking about with the trauma background, it's important that, again, connections. So maybe thinking of first of all, which battles to choose. Because as teenagers getting more independent, you want to figure out which ones are worth kind of going into, because it could cause more conflict. And then the way that you react, there's a lot of research that says instead of sort of threatening to take things away when a teenager in particular, I can't speak to younger children, but misbehaves, trying to find another way of connection. So teenagers don't often love to spend a ton of time with their parents. But so if teenager does something wrong, instead of taking away a phone, maybe the consequence or the reaction is, you're going to go for a walk with us on Saturdays, or you're going to do something that's more of like a building of a connection with the family. There doesn't have to be a label of a mental health for that. I mean, like, we all should be trying to do that. Our teenagers are going to act out, especially for bilingual new Mainers who are coming and their kids are struggling with like learning how to be in the American culture from their home culture. There's a lot of sort of conflict between the two and trying to test parents about that. So I think it's finding a reaction, a way to intervene that isn't necessarily like punishing, which we think we should do to right the behavior, but is more like engaging and connecting with the young person, if that makes sense.
I think in the elementary school level, a lot of times when there is a apprehension on the part of a parent for counseling, traditional counseling, I often rely on our community specialists too, and cultural brokers to help us bridge the gap of understanding. And I think that when I have found that, it's when you speak with any parent and you are speaking to them about a concern about their child, I think there's usually a shared understanding that everybody's trying to help. I don't really find that the barriers around that aren't often as big as I think we worry they're going to be. I think there are some parents, when they hear kid's going to get into psychotherapy, they're going to say no. But if you were to tell them that their child is really having trouble making friends, and I happen to have a group of kids that are maybe newcomers or that are like them, that we all get together once a day and we have a chance to play together and do things together so that they can get more familiar with the school. I don't think people have a problem with that. I think if a parent hears that their kid is really having a lot of trouble with anger in school, then I have a group of kids that just like kids that we get together every day and we talk about anger and we figure out different ways of doing it. There's less resistance to it if it's talked about in that way. So I think it's sometimes that, we're all in agreement that we want to help kids manage and be effective in school. It's just having that time to really communicate together. And if you have a culture broker who can help with the language and put someone at ease with what we're trying to get to, that really helps.
I would just like to add, if there's time, I presented with some youth ambassadors at the Maine Principals Association a couple of years ago, and the head of the Maine Principals Association came up after our panel and said the same thing, like, what do you do when the parents refuse to admit that mental illness is a real thing? So it was a parent issue that they found being at school was the only place that they could talk about this. I am such a believer in the power of storytelling. And I look at this gorgeous photo exhibit that is made up of 22 faces from all ages, ethnic backgrounds, young, old, Asian, African-American, African. And I'd love to see this, a forum or a possibility for storytelling for younger people to share their stories and for their parents, because a lot of parents don't know. I was one of those parents who didn't know, and I'd love to see more of these beautiful young storytellers share their stories with their communities. And that is maybe another ripple effect of it's not talked about, but maybe if you start talking about it, we'll see change.
I also think there's a explicit assertion from Portland Public Schools that one thing we want is that every student feels connected to one adult, at least one adult in their school. And I grew up with loving parents, but we weren't going to talk about mental or behavioral health or the concerns that were in my mind, similar to the story that Suzanne talked about. And I just wonder about what we can do to invite students to let staff know that I don't feel connected, or invite families to know I'm not sure my child feels connected. I mean, I spoke with a parent for an hour and a half this afternoon, right before this call, who said, I care about my kid. I appreciate everyone at school, but my kid feels so disconnected. And what do I do? And I said, let's get together and figure out who that person is. And then we after a little bit of digging, we found people. And unfortunately, the students acting out, resulted in their being off the team of a particular sport where they felt connected to the coach. And I was like, well, let's come back together and reconnect, because the research for decades now has been, if there's one point person outside of the home that I feel connected to, an adult, that's the number one resilience maker, is I feel connected to an adult that I can speak to, because my parents were loving, but I couldn't speak to them about my mental health or behavioral health challenges. I wasn't going to. But I didn't have an adult at school that I felt comfortable coming to. So I think that the Portland schools' emphasis on that is really critical. And I do wonder about how we can, if there are families that are feeling I'm not sure my kid is plugged in, what our response protocol is for that, so that we can connect and say, here's a point. And it doesn't have to be the social worker, although they're a great, target, but they got a lot going on. But it could be a teacher or a coach or anything. I just wonder about these things, so that we can plug in and connect and anchor kids, so that they can eventually open up and ask for help and understand and be available to all the things that the Yellow Tulip Project is offering, and understanding that I'm not alone. But oftentimes it takes an adult to say, I'm your person. And it's difficult to do at the secondary level. At the primary level, we often think the person is the classroom teacher, but at the secondary level, everyone's got so many teachers and support. So it's a little bit foggier. So it's a little more troubling. So I would encourage families that are unsure if their student feels like they have a point at school, to be bold, be very bold, in a way that I don't think my family could be. I hope they don't see this on YouTube. But encourage me to reach out to school, connections, and say, I need to talk to someone. And then that person, whoever it is, a social worker, counselor, teacher, can plug them into the resources so that they do feel connected, and then ultimately can connect with the family and do that difficult work that happens, more systemically. I apologize for jibber jabbering there.
There was a question about SELs, saying they liked our answer. I'm not sure which Chris, but we'll both take credit for it. They like Chris's answer about how it is embedded. Wonder if there's thinking about this approach versus second step, but maybe it's both and. And I would say, yes, it is both and. That second step is a pragmatic social skills curriculum, which really has things on there. For example, what do you do if someone cuts in front of you during Foursquare? What do you do if you want to join a group and join a game and kids are playing, and how do you go about asking to join? And there's role playing and there's practice. So it's pragmatic social skills, and it's very helpful for kids to have that type of social skill. But there's also a part of it, SEL, social emotional learning, which is learning about their emotions, their own emotions, and how to manage them. That, throughout the day, we all go through a series of ups and downs, and sometimes our bodies are running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and how do we calm that down? Sometimes we're really angry at a peer. They were my best friend and they didn't invite me to play. So now how do you manage your anger part? So it's a combination of things. So yes, it's that it's both.
With our interpreters, any questions from your spaces?
I just want to say I'm so glad we had this tonight. I'm always trying to find ways to reach out to parents and talk about these, mental health and trauma. And so I'm not sure who organized it, but this is really important. So I'm very glad we had this.
I think that's good for the night. I don't see any more questions, Nanette. So you want to remind people about signing in and all of the things that you do as you close and the evaluation.
So please check us out there. We'll be having another Parent University session on February 4th. Grace, help me.
It's the 16th.
Okay, 16. Okay. It's understanding the college process. And we did send a reminder in the MailChimp about that, but we'll be doing it again. It will be on our social media. So if any of you families are interested in that, please join us for that as well. Thank you for being here very, very much. We know it's not the same as in person, but we so appreciate your support. I know it's not ideal, but this is still community. So we appreciate you being here very, very much. Thank you.
I just want to add, Nanette, that, why it is important for us to get your feedback. One of the questions there is asking you for ideas about what it is that you want to see us host in our Parent University sessions, some things that is important to you. And so please give us feedback. We welcome those, and we will do our best to bring experts to attend to the issue that you want to address.
Thank you to Suzanne, Chris, and thank you always to our interpreters, and to Sophie also. Thank you. And that will be all for this evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Good night.
Thank you.